Year 2874. Several human colonies began to disappear. No one knows why. There is no war. There are no remains. There are no distress calls. Only silence. What seemed like a communication failure would ultimately force humanity to make the most extreme decision in its history.
Don't speak. They're listening. Something is coming this way. We have to leave now.
Year 2874. Humanity no longer belonged to a single planet. 3 centuries of expansion had transformed an Earth-based civilization into a network of worlds scattered across dozens of star systems. Earth remained the origin of our history, but it was no longer the center of our lives. Billions of people had been born without ever having seen the planet where humanity began. Each colony had a purpose. The inner worlds were home to the government, research, and the great universities. The outer ring continued to push the boundaries of exploration, founding new settlements around stars that, centuries earlier, had been nothing more than points of light. In the night sky. Minerals, food, technology, medicine, and millions of travelers moved between them. Trade routes never stopped. Orbital ports operated day and night. Factories built ships that took years to reach their destination, while information traveled through the Helios network, a communications infrastructure that held all of human civilization together. That network was much more than a technological system. It was humanity's nervous system. Every second, it carried government orders, economic transactions, scientific discoveries, and conversations between families separated by light years. If the Helios network stopped functioning, trade would grind to a halt. Colonies would be cut off, and a civilization built over centuries would begin to fragment. But that had never happened. Human expansion had survived economic crises, colonial wars, pandemics, and even the failure of several interstellar expeditions. There was a sense that we had learned to master space, that there were no longer any threats capable of endangering a civilization of that magnitude. It was precisely that confidence that caused no one to pay much attention when a colony stopped responding. Communication outages did happen. A stellar storm could overload the repeaters. A malfunction at an orbital station could leave an entire system cut off for days. There had even been instances where a colony remained silent for weeks before the connection was restored. Everything seemed to indicate that this was just another such incident. The authorities recommended waiting. Technicians began the routine checks. And the vast majority of the population didn't even realize that a colony had disappeared from the network. But the days kept passing, and the connection never returned. The first inspection ships were sent on what was expected to be a routine maintenance mission. No one expected to find anything out of the ordinary. However, even before those expeditions reached their destination, another colony stopped responding. And a few days later, a third. This could no longer be explained as a coincidence. Control centers began comparing dates, trade routes, and navigation logs in search of any common thread. They reviewed communication systems, star charts, and the movements of all civilian and military fleets. No answers emerged. Meanwhile, the Helios network map revealed an increasingly disturbing picture. Where there had once been a colony connected to the rest of humanity, now there was only a void. Theories began to multiply. Some spoke of sabotage. Others suspected a new generation of undetectable weapons. There were also those who argued that those colonies had decided to isolate themselves voluntarily. But no explanation could answer the same question. Why hadn't any of them asked for help? Why hadn't anyone sent a single message? Why did they always disappear in complete silence? For the first time since humanity had conquered the stars, the greatest concern was no longer a war, a crisis, or a natural disaster. It was something far more unsettling, not understanding what was happening. And the more time passed, the more evident it became that this was no accident. It was the beginning of something that would forever change the history of our species. At first, our species sought answers where it had always found them. The initial hypotheses pointed to a failure in the Helios network. Then came theories about sabotage, terrorism, artificial intelligence, interstellar piracy, or even an unknown epidemic capable of spreading among colonies without leaving a trace. For months, dozens of scientific teams worked independently, trying to prove one of those theories. None succeeded. Expeditions sent to the vanished worlds returned with more questions than answers. They found no destroyed cities, no collapsed reactors, and no signs of combat. In many cases, the automated systems continued to function exactly as they had the day before the disappearance. It was as if time had stood still. Life had vanished. But the world kept on running. Uncertainty began to spread throughout all the systems that remained intact. Trade routes saw a decline in activity. Some governments began restricting travel to the outer ring. The first conspiracy theories flooded the Helios network. Some claimed that the colonies were rebelling against Earth. Others spoke of unknown technology secretly developed by a rival power. And there were also those who espoused a much more disturbing idea. that it wasn't a war. It was something completely different. Faced with a lack of answers, the Expansion Council ordered the creation of the largest data analysis project in history. For the first time, all available records from the missing colonies were gathered and compared with data from the worlds that were still connected. Their population, their economic activity, their distance from Earth, their atmospheric composition, their technological level, their energy production, their position within the trade network. Thousands of algorithms searched for weeks for any patterns that might explain what was happening. They found none. The colonies were completely different from one another. They belonged to different star systems. They had different economies. They had even been founded at different times. There was no pattern, or so it seemed. Until one of the teams decided to study a piece of data that, until then, no one had considered important. They didn't analyze what those colonies were receiving. They analyzed what those colonies were sending into deep space. And for the first time since the disappearances began, a pattern emerged. A pattern so improbable that it would change the history of humanity forever. The discovery completely divided the scientific community. The missing colonies did not have similar populations, economies, or strategic locations. They had only one characteristic in common. They were the ones that transmitted the most signals into space. For weeks, no one wanted to draw a conclusion from that data. The largest colonies needed more communication systems, more navigation radars, and more beacons to coordinate traffic between star systems. It was perfectly reasonable that they were also the ones generating the highest volume of transmissions. Many researchers argued that it was all simply a coincidence. But a small group of scientists revived an old idea about the silence of the universe. It was known as the dark forest theory. It wasn't a scientific theory. It was a speculative idea about the behavior of unknown civilizations, a possibility impossible to prove, but also difficult to rule out. What if the universe seemed silent, not because it was empty, but because all intelligent civilizations had learned the same lesson? In a pitch-black forest, any noise gives away your position, and anyone who reveals their position without knowing who might be listening may never get another chance to do so. For generations, that idea was treated as an academic curiosity. An exercise in imagination with no evidence to back it up, until the disappearances began to look all too much like what it described. The colonies that most openly announced their presence through long-range radar, communication networks, and navigation beacons. They were also the first to disappear. That pattern wasn't enough to prove anything. But from that moment on, each new disappearance made the old hypothesis a little harder to ignore. The investigation was immediately classified. The reports disappeared from the Helios network, and the Expansion Council called an extraordinary meeting with representatives from all the human colonies. For days, there was no talk of conquering new worlds, nor of building more fleets. nor of developing new weapons. Only a single question was debated. What would happen if that hypothesis were true? The proposal that emerged from those meetings seemed crazy. Reduce emissions, shut down the large antennas, renounce centuries of progress, make silence the primary survival strategy of an entire civilization. Many delegates rejected the idea outright. They were unwilling to transform humanity based on a theory that had never been proven. Others believed exactly the opposite. If there was even the slightest possibility that the dark forest theory accurately described how the universe worked, ignoring it could mean the extinction of our species. While the council remained divided, another colony stopped responding. The total was now 17. From that moment on, the question was no longer whether the dark forest theory was true. The real question became something else. Could humanity afford to make a mistake? The decision wasn't made in a single day. For months, governments, scientists, and colony leaders debated a question for which there was no right answer. Which was more dangerous? To continue living as usual, or to completely transform human civilization to protect itself from a threat that no one could prove ever have existed? For the first time since the beginning of interstellar expansion, humanity was not debating how to move forward. It was debating how much it was willing to give up in order to continue existing. The first measures were subtle. The power of long-range radars was reduced. Navigation beacons stopped transmitting continuously. Scientific transmissions to deep space were suspended indefinitely. Officially, everything was justified as a temporary reorganization of the Helios network. But that reorganization never ended. With every new colony that disappeared, the measures grew stricter. The large radio telescopes were shut down. Orbital antennas began to be dismantled. Thousands of satellites stopped transmitting all at once. For the first time in centuries, the space around the human worlds began to fall silent. Not all colonies accepted those orders. Many governors considered it impossible to maintain an interstellar civilization without open communications. Others were convinced that the dark forest was an absurd theory that was destroying centuries of progress out of fear. Some colonies ignored the restrictions. They continued to use their communication networks. They kept their navigation beacons active. They continued to announce their presence to the galaxy as they always had. No one from Earth intervened. No one sent fleets to force them to obey. They simply waited. As the months passed, several of those colonies also stopped responding. After that, continuing to broadcast no longer seemed like bravery. It began to look like a death sentence. The debate ended that same year. The Expansion Council unanimously approved the largest transformation project in human history. The Helios network would be rebuilt from the ground up. Wireless communications would disappear. Planetary networks would rely exclusively on millions of kilometers of fiber optic cable buried beneath the surface. Cities would no longer light up the sky. Orbital ports would minimize their emissions. All new infrastructure would have a single objective: not to draw attention. Over time, the planets themselves began to change. The great metropolises grew beneath mountains, oceans, and enormous protective domes. From orbit, many inhabited worlds began to look like completely lifeless planets. No lights, no visible traffic, no emissions, as if a civilization had never existed on them. That process came to be known as the Great Blackout. It wasn't a war. It wasn't a natural disaster. It was a decision. The decision of a species that had conquered the stars and now chose to hide from them. But turning off the antennas was only the beginning. Because surviving in silence would end up transforming much more than just our technology. It would end up transforming the very nature of humanity. As generations passed, silence ceased to be an emergency measure. It became a way of life. Cities grew beneath the planet's surfaces, protected by kilometers of rock capable of blocking any emissions into space. From orbit, humanity's ancient worlds looked like barren deserts. Where once there had been illuminated continents, now there was only darkness. Wireless communications disappeared entirely. All information traveled through millions of kilometers of fiber optic cable buried underground. No device emitted radio signals. No vehicle used active radar. No beacon signaled the presence of an inhabited world. For the first time since the invention of radio, humanity stopped speaking to the universe. Those rules ended up transforming much more than just technology. They transformed culture. Children grew up learning that the sky was not a place to explore, but a place to hide from. Astronomy stopped searching for other civilizations. Its sole mission was to ensure that none of them could find us first. Even language changed. Silence was no longer understood as an absence. It became a virtue. Over time, new professions emerged. The guardians of the echo constantly patrolled the colonies, searching for any accidental emissions. A faulty transmitter, a forgotten antenna, or an electromagnetic leak could endanger an entire planet. They never knew if that threat was real. They only knew that the consequences of a mistake could be irreversible. 5 centuries after the Great Blackout, humanity still existed. It had survived. But it was no longer the same species that once dreamed of filling the galaxy with signals and fearlessly exploring the universe. Now it built cities to remain unseen. It designed technology to remain undetected. And it taught each new generation the same lesson. In a universe about which we know nothing, silence may be the smartest way to survive. We never discovered what really happened to the first missing colonies. We never found evidence that the dark forest theory was true. But we also never found a single piece of evidence to prove the contrary. And perhaps that is the greatest paradox of our history. Humanity conquered the stars, only to discover that perhaps the best way to survive among them was to behave as if we had never been there.